Youts, Nuch Abti, Haisliduch Nugwa. Hello, I'm called Ab, and I'm xa'isla. I wanted to share something with you about the xa'isla language. So I'm going to start off by sharing a picture. So this is a picture I took yesterday, and I'll just zoom in here so you can see it a little bit better. So this is something that I just happened to see, and maybe I can zoom in a little bit more. So you can see there that there are a lot of crows. They're feeding on something. So while I was seeing this, I thought to myself, how can I describe this in xa'isla? And I came up with a sentence, and I said it. And I'm going to switch to a different document here and walk you through how I did that. So this is something that I do when I'm building a xa'isla sentence. So in English, if I say something like this, then I could say, if I see a scene like that, I could say, I see a lot of crows. In xa'isla, I would say, Du kwalankay kainams kyan kasachai. Du kwalankay kainams kyan kasachai. So instead of trying to translate an English sentence word for word, that's not what I do. Instead of doing that, think about this. Think about what are the most important parts of the sentence. So they are the subject, S, the verb, V, and the object, O. So one of the things that makes English and xa'isla so different from each other is sentence structure. So English is an SVO language. So that means most sentences, you're going to have the subject first, then the verb, then the object. Xa'isla, on the other hand, is a VSO language. So more often than not, the verb comes first, then the subject, then the object. So if you break a sentence down into its most basic parts, it looks like this. So in English, we have I. That's the subject, and I've color-coded these so you can see how they relate to each other. In this case, the subject is in green. I, in this case, is the subject. The verb is see, so I've colored that in red. The object is crows, and I've colored that in blue. If you look at the xa'isla sentence structure, dukwala comes first because it's a verb. And instead of a full word, we have a single letter that's added to the end of the subject. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the N here is the verb. Or actually, it's the subject now. So they've reversed. So dukwala is the verb, it comes first. The N is the subject, it comes after. And it's actually attached to the subject. So these two belong together. And then kyankas is crow or crows. Could be singular or plural. That is the object. So the object stays in the same place. But the subject and the verb are reversed when you go from English to xa'isla. So you could leave this English sentence as it is, and it would still be acceptable. So you could say, I see crows. That would be perfectly acceptable to say in English. However, changes will need to be made in order to convert it to xa'isla, starting with word order. So dukwala is a verb meaning to see. So it comes first in a xa'isla sentence. Dukwala starts the sentence off. The letter N, when you put it after a word, is short for nugwa. And in this case, it means I or me. So you could use the full word and say dukwala nugwa, but it's longer, and it's longer to say, it's longer to type out. So it's easier just to reduce it down to the single letter N and put it after Dukwala. So in this case, I'm going to put a little dash here. So these little dashes mean, well, when you put it in front of something, it means that it comes after a word. In this case, Dukwala, if I put a dash there, that means we're adding something to the end of it. So we're taking N, which is short for Nugwa, adding it to Dukwala. So now we have our verb and our subject, which are now one word. What else do we need? We need the object. So in this case, the object is kyankas, which means crow. Kyankas. And as I mentioned before, this could be singular or plural. Now we have all the parts we need to make a sentence, but there's more changes to be made. So this is a very important part, a very important point to make, that people really need to understand to really get a full understanding of how the xa'isla language works. Most xa'isla words are descriptions. They're not meant to be used on their own. They need to be supported. So it's not like English where you have 3 words completely unsupported, nothing added to them except for crow. In this case, we're pluralizing it by adding an S. We don't do that in xa'isla. So out of these words, English words, the only one that changes is crow, and we're just changing it to plural. None of the other words change. I is used as it is. C is also used as is. That's not how it works in xa'isla. So you support xa'isla words by adding context. And since xa'isla is a polysynthetic language, polysynthetic means there's a lot of parts of words, and you create meaning by putting those parts of words together. And we add context to single words by adding things to the end of them, more often than not. So we've already added context to Dukwala by adding the letter N, or I after it. Since Dukwala simply means to see, it does not specify who's doing the seeing. So by adding N, we're giving much needed context to it. So instead of just saying Dukwala, which means to see, we're saying Dukwalan, which means I see, or I am seeing. Other words we can add are kainum, which means a lot, and kai. Kai is a little bit hard to describe because in one sense it means something like the. So kai, kyankas, kind of means like the crow or the crows, but it doesn't just mean the, it also refers to location. And basically by saying kai, we're saying that it's further away from us. Again, we run into another problem. Kainum, I'm going to put this in between forward slashes. Kainum cannot be used by itself. It needs to be connected to kyankas. We can't just put the words side by side. So we can't just put kainum and then kyankas. What we can do, fixing my typos here as we go, what we can do here is add S to the end of it. This works like adding N to Dukwala. So we're taking a full word and reducing it to a single letter. So the S is a shortened form of the word hace, which means by, of, or about. So by putting it between K and kyankas, what we're doing is we're now saying a lot of crows. So kainums, kyankas means a lot of crows. But We also can't use kyankas by itself. It needs context as well. By adding a che to the end of it, we're telling people that the crows are away or over there. So we're indicating the location of the crows. So they're not close to me, the person who's speaking. They're not close to you, the person I'm speaking to, or the listener. They're somewhere else. That's what a che means. It means they're away. So this sentence structure could be used for other things. You would need to change the object of the sentence. So instead of saying dukwalang kai, kainams kyan kasachai, you could say something like dukwalang kai, kainams tigilak sachai, and this would mean I see a lot of seagulls. You could say dukwalang kai, kainams x dukwi ichai, and that would mean I see a lot of eagles. So x dukwia, that should be a raised W. X dukwia means eagle or eagles. We could also say dukwalankai kainams ga kachai, and this would mean I see a lot of ravens. So gach means raven. And there are changes you probably noticed here. And this has to do with the fact that a lot of the times we can't just add a che. Sometimes we need to make changes to a che to make it fit the word structure, the sentence structure. Sometimes we'll have to change the end of a word. In this case, we're actually not changing it. The proper word is gak, but when we use it by itself without anything after it, we tend to say gach. So gach is actually the true form of gach. So again, when we talk about ravens and we're not adding anything to the end of the word, then it's gach. When we add something to the end of the word, then we're keeping the K there, so it becomes ga kachai. You could also remove kainams from the sentence. So I added kainams just to give a little more context to the sentence and also to practice a little bit more, to add more to the sentence, to give me more practice in using sentences that are a little bit more complex, a little bit longer, to give more context to what I'm actually saying. It's also important to point out that dukwalankai kainams kyan kasachai is present tense, meaning that it's happening now. If we wanted to talk about it after it happens, we'd have to change it to past tense. So those are some things to keep in mind, that I'm keeping in mind when I'm creating sentences like dukwalankai kainams kyan kasachai. I'm going to switch back to my webcam here. Now, this is more advanced. So if you're just new to the language, this is probably something you would need more training in order to do. There's a lot of things you would have to understand before you could actually get to this point where you're creating sentences on your own, creating original sentences. But this is something that I can do because I'm an advanced learner. And you've seen that I took one sentence and I changed it in a number of ways. And I can do that because I understand whatever part of the sentence means. I understand what I'm saying. I understand what I'm doing when I'm making those changes to the sentence. So this is just something that I do to practice the language. So when I'm doing something like this, I'm taking the theoretical knowledge that I have and putting it into practical use. So what I'm actually doing here, when I'm describing things that I'm seeing in xa'isla, is I'm making the language a habit. And this really helps me tremendously in learning and practicing the language. So that's what I wanted to share with everybody. I hope that was very helpful to you. For now, I will say Langwathlina Oaxaca, wa, exquiguelas.